Hello and welcome to the seventh edition of Leadership from the Trenches. I've been having a blast making these, and the reason is because I get to work with guys like this. Look at these two beautiful people in front of me. So today we have Chris McQueen, who is the CAO of the Town of Fort Erie. Hello, Chris.
Good morning.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. And a longtime friend of Bryan Capriccio, who is the Vice President of Growth and Innovation with Brand Blvd. Bryan, welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you guys both for being here. I'm so excited about this. You guys are two leaders that are well established with your experience in it. You're also very well thought of by the people you work with. At least that's what they told me. I don't know if you guys are bribing them, but that's what they're telling me.
It's a good
So this
story.
is exciting.
That's right.
Um, the other thing that you two really have in common is you have different levels of leaders with your organization. You have from a supervisor level up to an executive level, but also different age groups and whatnot. So, Chris, let's start with you. What kind of challenges are you seeing leaders are facing today that maybe they didn't even 10, 15 years ago?
I think one of the challenges is motivating staff, motivating people in different generational groups, and motivating them in the face of recent changes. Like I think helping them to manage through change and trying to motivate people through change, and that not even impose changes, but like changes that are happening in the world, changes in politics, changes in the economy, have really changed the workplace, I think, in the last 5 to 10 years. We no one wants to talk about COVID, but it really put us through a very interesting change, like some in a good way and some in a not so good way. But we see things emerging today that we didn't see quite to the extent that we did 5, 10 years ago, like just general incivility. And so when you have leaders that are trying to motivate their staff and you're trying to motivate in our business like a public service, it can be challenging to motivate people when they're facing, a degree of incivility or um, just a different environment to work in. And I think the other thing is with change is just the speed of information in the last 5 to 10 years, whether it's, social media, whether it's AI, just the bombarding of information and trying to keep people focused and motivated in basically a pretty high pace of change in the world. So
That's really interesting. You talked about how people are not so civil with each other anymore. So obviously your whole team is customer service focused. I mean, that's the whole reason you exist, right? The town is to serve the residents. But what you're saying is, what I think you're saying is that the leaders are not only having to deal with this, but they're trying to keep their staff spirits up and keep them excited about doing their work, even though they're facing more pressure and more rude conduct from the residents.
yeah, absolutely.
That's really interesting. Sad to hear. Bryan, how about you? You've got a different environment. Of course, customer service is a huge focus of what you guys do as well. But what are you seeing from leaders today? And I should mention also, you owned a business for 10 years that Sprout, and you had a team of 25, 30 people there were doing various jobs. So what have you seen over that 10 years and now your time here at Brand as far as
Yeah,
leaders?
it's so funny. I think it's fascinating. I had some thoughts that I was going to share, but then as Chris was talking about change, and then he used the magic word that always perks my ears up, which is AI, Larry, as you know. It's so fascinating because I mean, yes, I owned a tech company, a software company, 10, 15 years, grew that, scaled that moved quick. Tech always moves quick. Social media has been an interesting change. Obviously, COVID has introduced a lot of changes. And yet I still think that we're not even changing as fast as what we're about to experience in the coming years.
Hmm.
And that is both equal parts as someone who's leading innovation at a company, exciting, but also incredibly scary in the sense of I look at the things that we can do. I was having a conversation yesterday with someone on our team, and we were talking about, this thing that we're able to accomplish today and how 3 months ago, we couldn't have even dreamt of doing that. And, it may have cost us 10, 15, $20,000 to do the same work that any of the three of us could hop on with the right knowledge and accomplish, in 15 minutes. And so like that pace of change, that speed, that velocity of change, I think is unlike anything we've ever experienced, both in the business world, but I think just as like as humankind. And I'm not, certainly one to be a doomsday thinker, but I think that we have to be moving quickly and we have to be adapting quickly and leaning into these things because the way that we work, I see, is going to be changing very, very quickly and will continue to change very quickly. And I think that's something that's really interesting for us as leaders to be leading through. Because I've seen both sides of this. One side where you resist the change and you kind of put your back up against the wall and um, you sort of say, well, this is the way we've always done it, and so we're not going to change it.
Right.
And that may have been something that you could stand on, maybe through a change from, into digital, into a change into, the internet and how we buy and purchase. I think maybe it would have been something you could have said through social, although I think a lot we've seen, Larry, you and I were involved in some social media groups like way back in the day, and it was just fascinating to watch that change there. But I just think now consumer behavior is changing. And so if you're in the sort of for-profit world like I'm in, if you're in the business world, my goodness, what a fascinating time to be alive. And so we have to be, leaning into that and sort of like I think curiosity is the number one thing that I love to say is a tenant that us as leaders can be having and then also replicating in the leaders that we lead as well.
So let's stay on this change discussion. A term I hear a lot is change fatigue. So
Mm.
Brian, you talked about the speed of it, and then thank you for scaring the crap out of me. Now it's going to get even faster. Great. I already feel like I'm behind. But change fatigue, I hear that term all the time that, hey, didn't we just do this? Now we're doing this, but you're already thinking
Mm.
about that. So how are you, especially a brand? Brand is a fast-moving company.
Yeah.
The president of your company does not like to sit still.
No.
Um, how are you finding with leaders now managing that frame of mind that change is never ending?
Yeah, I mean, the grass certainly doesn't grow under Chris's feet, that's for sure. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at things. Again, especially knowing now. Larry, remember the book Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah,
I mean, this was like
absolutely.
one of my favorite books. I mean, gosh, I probably read that book 20 years ago, and I think at the time it was 20 years old. So I mean, it's a classic on embracing change. And I think it would be an interesting study for, younger, newer leaders today to go back and read that book because I think that you'd almost see it having come full circle. Um, but yeah, I think that there's two components, right, to change. There's change for change's sake, which I think is where a lot of the change fatigue could often stem from.
Yeah,
If it's just like, oh my goodness, like what are we changing now? Like that's at some point, folks want to both leaders and the folks that they lead want to settle into a rhythm. They want to settle into
yeah.
what is the sort of normal, what is the status quo, and in a world where change is constant, it's the very antithesis of that. It's the anti-definition of that. And so I think that there is an element that we have to encourage, going on autopilot a little bit in some capacities. I'm a huge fan of gas pedal style leadership. I love driving forward. I love momentum. I love change. I love that. And I think in most environments, that's something that we need to be looking at. But at the same time, I'm not one to say let's pump the brakes, but instead let's look for that cruise control, button and just see where can we cruise, where can we settle into rhythm, where can we
Yeah.
settle into routine, and not just change for change's sake. So I think that's
Maybe we
that's the
could even
biggest
see
difference.
how the change is doing for a while.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, if you're always changing, you're never really looking to see is it working or is it not working.
What
And
kind
that's
of
something that
impact?
I've actually had lots of conversations at Brand about is to say, hey, look, here's a great pursuit that we can go after. Here's an interesting technology. Here's an interesting way that we can go about something. let's make sure that we're doing it for the right reason. Let's make sure that we're evaluating. I use language like experiment a lot in my leadership, and so we're actually going through one currently that ends this week, which is, hey, let's create this little 2 week experiment to say, what if we did this thing? Like what might happen if that were to be successful? What do we hypothesize as being the outcome of that experiment? And let's kind of like treat it almost like a scientific experiment. It's got a start, it's got an end, it's got measurables, and
Sure.
it has a hypothesis. And then at the end, we're going to say, was it good? Was it bad? What do we learn from that? And then how do we integrate that day to day now?
That's great. That's excellent. So, Chris, for you around change, your staff have to change technology, process, et cetera. But then you have residents, some that don't want change and some that want a lot of change. So how are your leaders juggling that environment?
Well, it's funny because when I was listening to Bryan, I wrote down here tradition. Like humans, we're very entrenched in traditions. And so like we have a calendar of traditions, we celebrate traditions. Like we're very predictable in terms of
Oh,
our
yeah.
own human behaviors in a lot of ways. And so when we serve a community of 36,000 people, we have, the spectrum of people who are the traditionalists who don't want anything to change today or ever. And then, you swing through and we have, people as Bryan self describes himself as, he's like full throttle on the gas in terms of, if we can change and do it, in a calculated way, like we should. And so for us, it's balancing that out because there are a lot of traditional things in a municipality that people don't want changed. And our methods and our ways of doing things often can't stay the way that we always did them. Like we have to keep pace with technology and innovation. And what I'm finding is the leaders that are most successful in this space we're in municipally is probably agility. And what I mean by that is like we have people that the people that are successful in leadership roles have the ability to like jump on the gas and take the opportunity to move things when you see the course and the path is right. But at the same time, we talked about, sometimes there's like change fatigue, and I've been accused of, implementing too many changes all at once, and I think people need that sort of settling period. And again, it's part of the tradition of just saying, okay, we've done this, let's kind of see how it's going. I love the experiment idea. We call them pilots. Let's pilot something, knowing that, you know, we're probably not going to reverse the pilot unless it like really fails miserably. But the pilot is just, can we get enough people past the early adopter stage, like to bring everybody else along? And so we pilot stuff. But agility is the ability to pivot if you have to, the ability to problem solve through, because I think a lot of the resistance to change is people, they see the uncertainty and they want to feel more certain of something. And
Yeah.
so to be able to problem solve to get them to a more predictable place, it may be a different place, but a predictable place for them to feel like, yeah, we're going to land for a little bit and the dust is going to settle. I can take a breath and, sort of reset, control, alt, delete, and then I'll like face the next one. And the other is the ability to continue to innovate. And sometimes helping people through change is actually part of the innovation itself, right? Like just how do I get people to buy into something? Like what's in it for them? And how do I help them to adapt? And so I would say it's about agility because it's the ability to have like enough rapid movement or the ability to know when to make the change that I think is most important because we're going to continue to face changes and our challenge is how do we bring people along with us, for us, whether it's residents or whether it's the staff here who are serving this community, we need to be able to bring them along and help them, give them the tools, help them to problem solve through some of the challenges we face with changes, a lot of changes that are outside of our control.
Excellent points. Again, I'm kind of throwing the questions to the side here. This is a great conversation. So, an old saying I've always heard about change is that um, individuals will not buy in unless they have a chance to weigh in. I know it rhymes.
Mm,
Maybe that's why I remember it. So it's having people a chance to have be part of the change. So in my classes, one of the things we talk about in change is I always ask the question in my class, do people hate change? Like, oh, absolutely, everybody hates change. No, we love change. We love new food, new movies, new music, new clothing, new trips. What we don't like is change we feel forced on us that we don't
mm,
understand. So that weigh-in, buy-in thing, I think, is huge. So with that, and Chris, I'll go back to you with this question is, what about autonomy? That's always something where how we talk about accountability a lot, but how do we also bring in autonomy? Because I don't see how the two can live without each other. How can I hold someone accountable if I don't give them some sort of autonomy to make decisions? So this is a long-winded question, guys. I apologize. But going back to the change initiative, if I'm going to give you a chance to weigh in for you to buy in, then I also think I have to give you some form of autonomy to make some decisions on that change. How do you feel about that, Chris?
Well, I think people need to have a common purpose or a cause. And so for us, you know, talking to our, like, we know what we do. This is the Simon Sinek stuff, but we know what we do. It's hard to describe how we do it. And the important thing for us, and it's been my more recent push with the staff, is understanding why are we here? Because I think, when we talk about purpose or cause, if everybody has a different but common why we're here, and for us, it may be serving the community, to build thriving communities, making the next generation's quality of life better than ours, leaving the place better than what we found it and all that stuff. When you have common purpose, it really gives people a sense of the where we're going
Hmm.
or why we're doing what we do. And I think when people have a common purpose and like it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but like some sort of shared vision about, why are we all in this together? I think it's easier to allow people to have some autonomy about how we get there. And so we tell them where we want to go, and then we enlist them to say, how do you think we should get there? And it does give people autonomy,
Hmm.
but autonomy to achieve the same purpose, the same common goal. And so I agree with you. They can coexist. I think people that have autonomy without a common vision are going to be like off course. Like they're going to be doing things that may or may not be fulfilling a common purpose. And they may be off on their own, like misguided in terms of something that's they're personally passionate about. And so I think, from a leadership perspective, when, in my case, leading an organization that's serving the community, as long as we can keep people hemmed into, some sort of common vision, some sort of common purpose,
Yeah.
I do think autonomy is important because I don't know how we're going to do everything that, 170 people in my organization may be doing day to day, week to week. So I have to give them some autonomy to say, hey, we're all driving at the same purpose, we're driving at the same results. How are you going to come in and operate with some level of autonomy to problem solve and get through things and deliver on, a promise or a commitment that we have to the community?
That's excellent. And Brian, Chris is talking about that common purpose, and with the municipality serving the town or city you live in, and I get that purpose can be fulfilling. In a for-profit organization, it's, hey, what's the purpose? Make Chris more money? That's not really exciting. So what's that purpose beyond making money? But how
Um,
do you find with change happening at such a rapid pace, how are you guys able to bring in that autonomy, knowing that people are still getting used to the change?
yeah, it's I mean, even Chris, as you said, 170 people, you definitely it's a different organization, different level of leadership and replicating skill, but also building accountability and autonomy as you go through that org. So it's just fascinating and amazing that you can lead that way. Um, I'm a believer in this like notion of giving people or encouraging people or coaching people through having an internal locus of control through things. And I think that that's really, really interesting because I've seen in leaders, but also in employees over the years, um, sometimes folks default to having that external locus of control where they say, well, things just happen to me. And so therefore I am a result of the things that happen to me. And I think it's so fascinating when you can coach through that and help people realize that their results. Larry, do you remember there was a coach, a speaker, I'm trying to think of his name, Larry Wingett. Does that sound familiar to you? Do you remember that
Yeah,
name?
he was a irritational speaker.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So way back in the day. And he
Yes.
had this, I think he either had a book or a talk or it was something. And the name of it was Your Results Are Your Own Damn Fault. And I loved that. I feel like I've built a lot of my the way that I lead over the last, decade and a half off of that kind of mentality of the sense of, hey, if you don't like something, change it.
Yeah.
If you want a different outcome, change the inputs. Like there's a lot of control that we have over things. And so when I lead, and then when I lead leaders to lead, that's something that I will often use tooling wise to say, hey, let's make sure that we're considering things from all angles. Um, I'm a huge advocate when it comes to both change, but just leadership in general, of instead of, telling people what to do, having them involved in the process. Because I do think that it's to your point of them having buy-in is huge. And in general, humans are more interested in the things that we have a hand in making. And so I think that that's really, really interesting. But I think then beyond that, there's a sense of humility that we as leaders can show up with when we're saying, like, I don't know the answers to these things. To Chris's point, right? Of like, I've got 170 people. There's people who are a lot smarter than me on my team who can do things. At my team at Brand, like I just hired two people on our marketing team. They're absolute geniuses in the space that they exist in. For me to pretend that I know better than them would be foolish of me. Like they are
Yeah.
brilliant, and so I love having people that just look at things from different angles. And then for me as a leader to have the humility to say, "Hey, like here's a problem to solve. How should we solve it? Like I don't have the answers. Like let's come up with the answers together."
Yeah.
And I think leading through that, and then when you can replicate that through a couple of layers in an org, you build this like living, breathing, beautiful system of humility and ideas and advocacy. And you also build this safe space for people to bring ideas and to try and to be okay to fail. That's something I had a conversation like this yesterday with someone on our team where I said, it's okay that you try something and fail at it as long as you learn from it. And so if you can learn from it, then you can now pick yourself up, figure it out, and then move on and bring that into the next thing that you try. And that's how you build this system that really can grow and have this space there. But none of that can exist if you don't give your team autonomy. If you
100%.
are sort of more that dictator style where you're like, this is what we're doing, shape up, shut up, and get to work, that's not going to work for growth, and especially in a space where change is happening so quickly that just is not going to scale.
100%. Let's move over to developing leaders. So one of the things I've always believed in is leadership isn't attached to a title, it's attached to an action. So
Mm.
that means that everybody that works for you or with you can be a leader. Um, what are you doing right now to develop your leaders, your current leaders and your future leaders? Brian, we'll start with you with that.
Mm. One thing that I obsessed about at Sprout at my old company when I was leading that is like a very people-centered approach to leadership, and that's always been at my core. It's who I am as a human. It's who I am as a leader, and I've found a lot of success in that space in leadership for small teams. And now coming into Brand, it's been a lot of fun to sort of like start to replicate that and sort of leave droplets of evidence throughout the rest of the leadership team, and then to sort of like have that start to get into the team. And what I mean by that is like showing up with far more empathy and people focused leadership as opposed to just maybe traditional leadership, which is very KPI focused, accountability focused, performance focused. Not to say that those things shouldn't happen, because it's obviously very important in orgs, especially at our org, which is a sales-led org. Like, numbers are everything, and sales is a numbers game. So it's not to say, I never advocate to say like you have to ignore the numbers, just like make people feel good. That's not the case at all. But I think what's really interesting that I've learned in my journey in leadership is that people-focused leadership is actually not as common as I maybe thought it was. It comes natural to me, and certainly I've seen some incredible people-focused leaders, but it's not as common as I maybe had thought that it was. And so that's been a lot of fun to replicate at Brand in my space now. And there's two very specific things that I've done, and this is, maybe silly examples, but I'll use it just for like a sort of case study, I suppose. I developed two tools for our entire team to fill out, and this is 65, 70 people strong. And one of them is a motivation by appreciation profile. So I've had everyone on the team go through this process that I developed, having learned and read the book, the five love languages at home. There's a version of that for work, basically to say, how do we as people, as employees in a company, want to feel appreciated, right? Is it words of affirmation? Is it gifts? Is it quality time? There's five different ways. And it's interesting that when you start to learn that about your people, how they want to feel valued and appreciated and thanked for the work that they're doing, not everyone is the same. And so if you're, used to doing hey, thank you, you did a great job, but someone's, appreciation language is quality time, they might just want to go for a walk with you and have a coffee and just chat. Or maybe someone, really likes gifts, and the better way to their heart is to, buy them a Starbucks card for $10 and say, go grab a coffee this weekend, with your wife, and just appreciate the work that you've done here. So when we start to learn things like that, and we start to tailor how we lead our people to make sure it's people first, I've developed a couple tools like that at Brand, and it's been a lot of fun to start to replicate that across the leadership team. And so I would say that's probably the one thing that is highest in my heart and in my head in terms of developing leaders and teaching leaders.
That's awesome. Great. That's a great tool. We should all steal that idea, Chris. Okay, we're going to steal that.
Love it.
So Chris, you also have you're developing leaders, but you have succession as well that you have to worry about. So what are you doing right now to keep those current leaders excited, but to develop your next level and next generation of leaders?
So Larry, what I've found, particularly in the municipal space, is I feel like municipalities went through waves of hiring in like 10-year blocks or something. But what we have, or what I've noticed, is there seem to be waves or changes, whether they're economic or otherwise, that have created these sort of waves of retirement. I think post-COVID, we had a wave of people who were much more career mobile. Remote working, for example, created a space for people to live here and work somewhere geographically different, or the flexibility to work in different places. So I think what I'm noticing, like, relative to, 25 years ago when I started in my municipal career, a lot of people in the municipalities started in the municipality, they stayed in the municipality, they may have gone up in the company to a more senior position, but people stayed. They were career municipal employees, and that seems to have really changed. And so it's changed the way municipalities have to hire, train leaders, motivate people to stay. The sense of loyalty, I think, isn't as profound as it used to be.
Mm.
And so it's important with succession, because when you have turnover, you're really like constantly, like when you talk about pace of change, that is a pace of change. You've got new people coming into the organization. You're trying to set a culture in the organization, a culture that's continuing to shift in terms of the people, which is what shifts the culture. And so there's this constant effort to try and create a bit of that stability around people. And so in terms of leaders, we have, or my experience here is, we have a lot of people who are good technical people, strong technical people, when you're looking at your high potential and high performing staff, like what opportunity do we have for them to give them some sort of career succession path so that they stay with the organization or they learn and grow with the organization and help us manage the pace of change. So I'm finding more and more we're promoting from within and providing people with leadership development opportunities. And so, a plug for the Goodman School of Business, but we have a number of our um, newer people managers going through programs like NextGen or Leadership Niagara or doing the management training. And Larry, thank you for coming in to talk to our group about, leading and managing high performance teams and helping us through that leadership development. Like I'm finding we're more involved in, on the job training, if I can call it that, for leadership. So, investing in people, putting them through those programs. We have technicians that never received training on how to be good people managers. And frankly, I didn't either. And so, as you're going through your career, being offered opportunities to learn and grow, learn the leadership tools, get competency training, whether it's in finance or HR or communications or leadership. Um, people come usually with their technical credentialing. And
Yeah.
so the leadership piece is important. So we've been really promoting that. We're working as a leadership team to do leadership development. And it's funny because we had a directors meeting and I was looking around the room and realizing, in 3.5 years that I've been with the town of Fort Erie, 7 people in my leadership team, only one of them has been here longer than me in their respective role. The rest are newer than me on our senior leadership team. And so, it's an interesting challenge. It's an interesting opportunity to have new leaders in their respective roles. Some have come up through, and some have come into their roles just more recently, new to the town. So, um, you know, trying to promote good opportunities for people to learn leadership. And even just, for us, we're bringing people like yourself in to help our leadership team understand how to be good leaders and how to be good leaders with each other because we are relatively new at working together. So yeah, just and I think providing that environment where people know that there are ways and means of acquiring new skills, testing things. Bryan talks about, giving people an opportunity for like safe fails, like try something. If it doesn't work, just have the confidence to call it early, pivot, brainstorm, figure out how you're going to do it, whether you call it an experiment or whatever. But those are good leadership opportunities
Yeah.
and giving people an opportunity, frankly, to take the reins and try things out. And so, we've really been encouraging people when, they're not at work to allow somebody to step in an acting role. Like make sure you've got a second in command. Like part of leadership, which people struggle with, is your ability to not be there and the organization to keep moving without you in
Yeah.
your absence. It's a vulnerable, great thing to do. Like it's just, to be able to go and know that people are like keeping things in check is really important. And I do think it helps to promote people with a sense of, yeah, I can see this as an organization that's going to help me grow, help me be a leader and lead in
Yeah.
this organization. And whatever, you said everybody in the organization can be a leader. You give them the right culture, the right environment to lead. You will have 170 people in your organization leading in their respective roles. And what a beautiful thing that is.
100%. Um, you mentioned most of our efforts in developing people is usually technical. I've always looked at every job as having three parts, three buckets to it: the technical part, the administrative part, and the people part. And the technicals usually why people get promoted. It's usually all the easiest to train. The
Yeah.
administrative is about deadlines, workflow, organization. That's sort of just making stuff happen. We always forget about the people. Well, people like him. Let's promote him. He's okay. He's a nice guy.
Hmm.
And then we don't teach them about conflict. They don't teach them about how to inspire people. That's great points, Chris. Thank you. So, Chris, I want to stay with you on a question about generations. So it's along the succession planning, but having different generations of leaders within your organizations, they look at the world differently. And that spills over to their teams. And excuse me, one of the conversations we had with your team was there's a there's a big culture at the town of Fort Erie, but then every department is sort of a micro culture of it, of hopefully connected to the bigger culture, but it's its own little culture, but it's heavily influenced by the leader. So how are you managing the culture of the town with those micro cultures depending on the generations that we have at play?
Yeah, so I mean, there's two things. It's the subcultures and getting to know and understand those subcultures. I think um I it sounds cheesy, but the manage by walking around. I
Yeah.
think the best thing that I can do is to ensure that I carve out time and space in my calendar to go out. And so this morning was an example. I don't often get out to our public works yard. And so 7 o'clock this morning, because that's the start of their shift, is showing up there and just having some dialogue with people in our public works yard because I don't understand their day to day because I don't see it other than, I drive past them when they've got, a crew set up doing some, roadside maintenance or something. But to actually go to where they are and just talk to people like, what are your pain points? What's the biggest challenge you guys have had? What are the three biggest complaints you have about the town or me or customers and frankly, people will be quite candid with you. And that spans all the generations. Like if you ask anybody, regardless of what generation they were born in, what do you think about something? People are pretty open to tell you what they think. And frankly, sometimes I hear things I didn't expect to hear. I might hear things I didn't want to hear. But when you ask somebody for their honest and candid feedback, it's nice to know that because as you get up in the organization and you get further away from what's happening on the front line, you become disconnected,
Yep.
whether it's generational or not. I think with the generational thing, it creates a different dynamic because you have people in those subcultures that have different beliefs and thoughts about stuff. And, I'm going to come back to the common purpose. Like, regardless of what generation you were born in, if you feel committed to serve, you feel a passion to serve the community, or you're inspired to serve the community, you will do it differently.
Yep.
You will find different ways to do it, but you will still be serving the community in an inspirational way. And so, it's really just trying to carve through what those differences are. And frankly, a lot of it is helping other people deal with that conflict or that confusion around having a different thought about it or a different philosophy around work. Like, my generation, we showed up at 8:30 and we punched in on time and we didn't, and they struggle with a generation that says, yeah, I'll be there around, 8:30-ish, and that might be 9. And so, trying to help people manage those different conflicts. And then the opposite is true. They're like, why is Chris sending me emails at 2 a.m.? Well, because Chris just got off a gaming console. He's got energy and he's sending emails at the time when he's most productive. And so those, like, it does create some shift. But I think in terms of leadership, it's having open dialogue with people,
Yeah.
understand their MOs. Like they are very different. I've got two teenagers. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking a different language with them, but you kind of have to cut through it. But again, if I ask them what they think about something, they're pretty candid with me on what they think. And so I think it is just, maintaining an open dialogue and then understanding what it is in terms of common purpose that keeps people moving forward. I mean, it's the same as, you go to marriage counseling, you can go to, a mediator for a labor issue and whatever. And one of the first things they try to do is they try to bring the two sides to 90% of the things where they share a common purpose. And then, you sift it out and then you're really just dealing with the other 10%. And I think it's a good approach with that generational gap is,
Yeah.
really trying to find that common purpose and then manage around the conflict or, the difference that, they bring to the workplace.
Right. We have more in common than we don't, right?
Yeah.
That's
for
excellent.
sure.
So, Brian, you have not as much generational gaps at Brand Boulevard, but you have a lot of remote teams and even
Mm.
different countries and whatnot. So, how are you finding leaders are managing that type of culture? And are you seeing those cultures have an effect on the overall culture of brand?
Yeah, I would say like the thing that's true, whether you're leading through generations or whether you're leading in person or virtual or a hybrid of the two, is like you're always leading people. And like that doesn't change no matter what environment or scenario it is. And I think that that is probably, again, kind of even going back to what I had said earlier of being more of a people first leader. If you lead the people and not lead the job or not lead the title or not lead the, responsibilities or the tactics of it, I think that we're going to find ourselves in a really good place. And so, I would say that when you're leading a remote team in that aspect, you kind of treat them the same way that you would need to treat somebody if they were sitting beside you in a desk or in a pod. They're still people, they still have feelings, whether they're in a different country or, down the street in the same city. Um, I would say that you can still treat them the same. They still want to feel valued, they still want to feel appreciated, they still want to feel like the work that they're doing has purpose, they still want to have a voice, they still want to feel productive. It's all the same. We're all living, breathing human beings, and so I think it's the same. I think tactically, certainly there are some shifts that you'll have to make if you're leading a remote team. Obviously you can't just throw a paper airplane at them and bug them about something, but like we have great tools like Slack, we have great tools like Zoom, like we're recording this. Like there's a lot of great tools to be able to bridge that gap. And I actually, interestingly, I saw this during COVID. Chris, you mentioned COVID earlier. So at Sprout, we were in person. We had an office for the longest time. And then, whatever date that was, I think it was March, 10th or whatever that was, 2020.
March
And
13th, I remember.
March 13th, that's what it was. So I said to the team, okay, gang, bring your laptops home. We'll take this week off and see you all in a week. Like, well, that was like a 2-year week, right? We all spent away from each other.
Right.
Um, and I mean, I was super proud of my team at Sprout at the time. Like we adapted to remote working and hybrid working, and we kind of kept the same rhythms, and we adapted what we had to adapt. Instead of having a happy hour or a coffee gathering, we would, hop into a Slack huddle and just be like, how was your weekend or this or that. We kind of built these little rhythms and these little things into our days to sort of still keep the human element alive. And I think that's just really important. Again, whether you're leading in person or you're leading remotely or you're leading hybrid, a combination of the two, we're still leading people.
That's awesome. Great advice. So I want to end with the question I always like to ask is because I've noticed that the people watching this webinar series are a lot of them are business owners, but a lot of them are also managers or leaders on their own, and
Mm.
some of them are very new. So what advice, Brian, would you give to a new leader who really wants to hit the ground running and wants to do a good job? What's that one or two things they should focus on right away?
Um, my favorite tool that I was ever taught by a mentor of mine years and years and years ago is um, it's called the leadership square. And so it's this idea of how do you lead somebody? How do you replicate? Because I think a lot of the times, Larry, you said earlier, we find the best people at doing the work, or maybe Chris, it was you that had mentioned it. We find the best people who are the best at their jobs, and we're like, great, let's put you into leadership. It's like, well, wait a minute. I'm just really good at doing what I do. I don't know how to teach people. And so that leads leaders to become frustrated because, they expect others to do the same kind of work that they do. They expect them to learn it at the same pace that they did. Or they just end themselves in a place where they're like, well, I could just do it better myself, or I could do it faster myself. It would take me less time to do it than it would to teach it. And so therefore I'm just going to do it. And I think that's a really a poor way to look at leading and replicating skill in others. And so this leadership square is this like process that I teach my leaders that I use on my teams, where you kind of walk anyone through this square, 1, 2, 3, 4, where you replicate skill. And the first part is where I do, you watch. The next one is I do, you help. The next one is you do, I watch. And the fourth one is you do, I watch, I help. Other way around, flip it around. Basically, it's this
Yeah.
process of letting go. It's this process of replicating and
Yeah.
making sure that the people that you're leading are comfortable. Because the reverse is often true, where we'll kind of just throw somebody in the deep end and expect them to be able to understand and figure it out. And for some people, they like that. But for a lot of people, they don't want to be treated that way. And so I think the more that we can replicate skill in a really kind way, in a really empathetic way, but in a way that really helps walk them through the process so that they feel like they're trained and onboarded into that well. I think we can succeed really well in that space.
That's a great tool. I'll have to Google that. Uh,
Mm,
it's just, it really seems like a confidence builder,
it's great, yeah.
right?
And what I love about it, Larry, is I use it and I teach it in my teams from a language standpoint where I'll say, hey, if I'm asking you to do something, you need to be able to identify where are you on the square. If you say, hey, Brian, like you're asking me for a three, but like I'm kind of feeling like I'm more in a two space for that. I say, perfect. I know exactly how to help you because I know what that means. I know what you need from me by you saying that you're in a two space. That means you need me to lead it and you're going to help and be involved. Or if someone's like, hey, Brian, like I'm good, like I'm four on that, it's like perfect. I don't even need to say anything. You know what you're doing. You could basically teach this thing. So it's a really good language thing too to get leaders and the people that are leading on the same page.
That's wonderful because leadership, success in leadership is so attached to confidence.
Yeah.
And if I know I have that safety net, but I also have that person that will say, no, you don't need me anymore.
Yeah.
You can do this. I believe in
Yep.
you. That's excellent. Chris, what advice would you give a leader that's looking to make an impact with their team?
I mean, in terms of new leaders, the one thing that new people have is the ability to say, I'm new here. And it does provide people with some permission to be curious, to ask questions that they may not otherwise have felt comfortable. I'm new around here. Maybe I can you know, get some advice from you, or what do you think about this? And so I think, new leaders bringing a willingness to be curious, to ask questions, to learn and grow and be, I guess, Brian talked about humility as, um, you know, a real gift for leaders, and entering in with that level of humility. And, just building off what Brian said, it's really some of it's around role modeling. And, I had a executive mentor of mine that said the best advice that I can give you about being a good leader is to role model the leader that was the most inspiring to you,
Mm,
which really, like, when you start to think about that every day, we've probably all worked for a leader that we did not find particularly inspiring. We may have worked for a bad leader. We may have come to odds with a leadership style that we said we would never want to be that kind of leader. And so you flip that around and say, okay, so who was that role model? Who was that leader that really, really inspired you? And sometimes it's a combination of different people. You're like, I liked that leadership aspect about Larry, and I'm going to role model that. But you know what? In a sort of different space, Brian talks about being, the people leader. Brian really brought me to a spot where I was inspired about his people leadership style, and role model it, because you're early in you're basically you're early in the recital. You get to practice, and try things before, with a little bit of grace from the people around you, to maybe not get it right the first time, or you're learning. You're like any other skill, you're learning it, and so you're going to make some mistakes along the way, but have the humility to like brush off and keep going. But I thought that was some of the best advice I got, was role model the leader that you aspire to be.
That is fantastic advice. That's really great. It's like Patrick Lencioni talks about being a vulnerable leader
mm.
and letting people know we're in this together and I don't have to have all the answers because collectively we'll find a way out of this. So that's such great advice. So Bryan Capricci and Chris McQueen, thank you so much for your time today. This has been brilliant advice for everybody, and I hope everyone really enjoys this episode. Thank you all.
Thanks, Larry.
Yep. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Brian.